He had long been the voice of a generation, but now he penned a personal letter to his younger self, reflecting on fame, authenticity, and the cost of expression. This moment of introspection, honestly, mirrors the struggles within labor balancing personal passion and systemic pressure. Artists, like workers, often grapple with exploitation disguised as success. The music industry, with all its glamour and gatekeeping, parallels broader labor systems where, visibility doesn't guarantee equity. Workplace discrimination persists not only in boardrooms and factories, but also in creative spaces, where race, gender, and class really shape access to opportunity. As Sowell notes, disparities do not always imply discrimination, but ignoring structural barriers ensures they persist. Workplace discrimination takes many forms: unequal pay, biased hiring practices, and toxic work cultures. In creative industries, it can mean being silenced, stereotyped, or, commodified. These patterns reflect broader labor dynamics, where marginalized workers are often expected to produce more with less recognition. The United States Equal Employment Opportunity Commission reports that racial and gender-based complaints remain among the most common forms of workplace discrimination. Whether in a studio or a warehouse, the question remains, who controls the narrative and who gets erased? Artists who challenge these norms often face backlash, echoing the experience of whistleblowers and organizers in traditional labor sectors. Against these injustices, labor movements rise like improvised solos, raw, urgent, and collective. From the industrial workers of the world to the Writers Guild of America, workers have organized to demand fair wages, safer conditions, and creative autonomy. These movements have shaped the rights many take for granted today: the 8-hour workday, anti-discrimination laws, and protections for collective bargaining. As Milkman argues, labor movements are not relics of the past. They are adaptive responses to new forms of exploitation. In music, protest songs become tools of resistance, amplifying the voices of those silenced by systemic inequality. Policies designed to protect workers, like Title VII of the Civil Rights Act or the National Labor Relations Act, offer frameworks for justice, but, honestly, enforcement remains uneven. Governments and organizations must move beyond symbolic gestures to implement structural change. In both labor and art, the struggle was not just about survival, but it was for dignity while surviving. The artist's letter to his younger self becomes a metaphor for every worker who dares to imagine a future beyond exploitation. Whether on picket lines or in verses, the demand is the same: recognition, equity, and the right to shape one's own story, and to be respected while finding that path.
So, what kinds of discrimination actually exist in workplaces? Well, it's things like unequal treatment because of your race, gender, age, or, other traits that are supposed to be protected. A lot of the time, these problems aren't just about individuals, but they're baked into the way things work, the structures that decide who gets what opportunities and who doesn't. Labor movements, they've been massive in shaping workers' rights. Workers came together to push back against exploitation, to demand fair wages, safer conditions, and the right to organize. Over time, they've had to adapt, because honestly, new forms of inequality keep popping up. And then, what actually protects workers from being exploited? There are policies, yeah, but it's the result of years, decades really, of people fighting for those rights. It's about analyzing where things still aren't fair, and figuring out how to make workplaces better for everyone.
Woody Guthrie and his son Arlo Guthrie are, well, true folk troubadours, each giving voice to resistance in their own way. Woody, born in 1912 in Okima, Oklahoma, became a symbol for the working class during the Great Depression and Dust Bowl. He traveled across America as a migrant laborer, absorbing the struggles of displaced farmers and, unemployed workers along the way. His songs were raw, direct, and honestly, often radical. They championed labor rights, social justice, and the power of collective action. With his guitar famously labeled "This Machine Kills Fascists," Woody became a troubadour for the labor movement, writing anthems like "Union Made" that celebrated union solidarity and defiance against corporate exploitation. Guthrie's music wasn't just about labor movements, it was part of them. He performed at union halls, supported strikes, and used his platform to amplify the voices of workers. Songs like 1913 Massacre and Union Made really captured the violence and courage that are part of labor history, while his columns for leftist publications made it clear he stood with those fighting inequality. Even though he was linked to communist circles, Woody's message went beyond ideology. He sang for dignity, fairness, and the belief that America belonged to everyone. His most famous song, "This Land Is Your Land," written in 1940, was actually a subtle protest against the sanitized patriotism of "God Bless America." Guthrie's original verses, which people often leave out, critiqued private property and economic exclusion. Arlo Guthrie, born in 1947, is Woody's son, and he inherited not just a musical legacy but, a real tradition of dissent. His breakout song, "Alice's Restaurant Massacre," released in 1967, became an anthem of anti-authoritarian humor during the Vietnam War era. The song is this 18-minute spoken-word monologue over a bluesy guitar riff, and it tells the story of a ridiculous arrest for littering that somehow spirals into a sharp critique of military bureaucracy, surveillance, and, honestly, the absurdity of institutional power. Arlo's storytelling, wry, rambling, and razor-sharp, marked a generational shift from his father's raw labor ballads to a more ironic, countercultural satire. Alice's Restaurant wasn't just a protest song, it was a kind of cultural mirror, reflecting the contradictions of American justice and the surreal logic of the draft. Like his father, Arlo performed at rallies, festivals, and activist gatherings, using humor and folk tradition to question authority. His work connected with the anti-war movement, environmentalism, and civil liberties, often blending entertainment with political education. While Woody's guitar declared, "This machine kills fascists," Arlo's voice, it invited folks to laugh at the machine. And then maybe, to take it apart.
So, what forms of discrimination exist in workplaces? Well, workplace discrimination includes things like biased hiring, unequal pay, limited promotion access, and, hostile environments based on race, gender, age, disability, or sexual orientation. These patterns often stick around because of implicit bias and structural inequality. Even algorithmic hiring tools honestly can reinforce discrimination when they're trained on biased data. And, how have labor movements shaped workers' rights? Labor movements secured core protections like the 8-hour workday, minimum wage, and collective bargaining. They made labor a civic issue, pushing for safety standards and anti-child labor laws. Their influence is still felt today, especially in debates over gig work and union access. Right, so, what policies protect workers against exploitation? Laws like the Fair Labor Standards Act, OSHA, and Title VII of the Civil Rights Act regulate wages, safety, and discrimination. These policies are meant to prevent exploitation, though let's be real, enforcement gaps remain, especially in informal and contract-based sectors. Worker protections often depend on collective action and legal advocacy.
As the electric guitar began to redefine the sound of rebellion, artists like Bob Dylan challenged the status quo, not just musically, but socially. Gender roles and queer identities, long policed through cultural norms, began to rupture under the weight of visibility. Yet rebellion, like identity, evolves. From folk singers in suits to gender-fluid icons in Technicolor, the performance of self becomes a battleground for legitimacy and freedom. In this lineage stands Ethel Smith, a lesbian suffragette composer whose life and work defied Victorian constraints and reimagined music as political force. Born in 1858, Smith fought fiercely for her right to compose, conduct, and live openly. Her anthem, The March of the Women, became the rallying cry of the British suffrage movement, performed at rallies, in prisons, and even conducted by Smith herself with a toothbrush from her cell window. Her music was not just accompaniment, it was activism. Smith's refusal to conform to gender expectations, both in her appearance and her compositions, made her a target of criticism, yet also a beacon for those resisting the erasure of queer and female voices. Her relationships with women, including Emmeline Pankhurst and Virginia Woolf, further positioned her as a pioneer of LGBTQ+ rights, long before such language existed. Today, movements for gender and queer liberation have made, some really profound gains, but they also face backlash and internal strain. Some critics argue that activism has become performative or even exclusionary, sort of pushing tradition into a corner where nuance is lost. When the masses are forced into a box, whether of rigid progressivism or nostalgic conservatism, honestly, dialogue just collapses. Smith's legacy reminds us that true rebellion honors complexity. Her music didn't erase tradition, it reoriented it. The March of the Women is not a bombastic anthem, it's a restrained, resolute call to action, echoing through time with both dignity and defiance. In confronting gender inequality and advocating for LGBTQ+ rights, Smith modeled a form of resistance that was, both radical and rooted. Her life really invites us to ask, how do we balance progress with pluralism? And how do we ensure that movements remain expansive, not dogmatic? The answer may lie in art, in the quiet power of a melody that simply refuses to be silenced.
So, how do societal expectations shape gender roles? And what challenges do LGBTQ+ individuals actually face in society? I mean, what are the key movements that are out there, advocating for gender and sexual equality? And what does the author mean by progress with pluralism? Right, so gender inequality refers to the unequal distribution of power, resources, and opportunities based on gender. It shapes access to education, labor, and leadership, often reinforcing, like systemic hierarchies, as Butler said back in 2006. LGBTQ+ rights, on the other hand, they're about the legal and social protections for people of, diverse sexual orientations and gender identities. These rights challenge heteronormative structures and really push for visibility, equity, and inclusion, just like Chauncey talked about in 1995. Now, when we talk about identity and social equality, we're really asking, how do we challenge hierarchy through identity, like in Born This Way by Lady Gaga, or films like Triangle of Sadness? It's all about gender roles and what society expects from us, isn't it?
Societal expectations often prescribe these, pretty rigid gender roles, reinforcing binary norms of masculinity and femininity. Judith Butler argues that gender is not something we're born with, but performative, constructed through repeated social behaviors. Yeah, that's Butler, 2006. Lady Gaga's Born This Way really defies these norms, celebrating flamboyance, fluidity, and self-acceptance. The song becomes a sort of sonic protest against the bureaucratic rigidity of gender roles, kind of like musicians in an orchestra refusing to play only the notes assigned to them. LGBTQ+ individuals, face systemic barriers, legal discrimination, social exclusion, and cultural erasure. George Chauncey documents how queer communities have historically been marginalized through institutional control and moral panic, as he wrote in 1995. Gaga's anthem responds directly, affirming resilience and visibility while challenging the societal hierarchy that privileges heteronormativity. In the metaphor of the orchestra, LGBTQ+ voices are often relegated to the back row, but Born This Way demands they be heard center stage. Movements such as the LGBTQ+ rights movement, intersectional feminism, and the Born This Way Foundation act as conductors of social change, rewriting the score of societal norms. Gaga's anthem becomes both a rallying cry and a curriculum, teaching that identity is not a deviation but a declaration. Just as Triangle of Sadness critiques class and beauty standards through absurdity and reversal, Born This Way reclaims identity as power, inviting every listener to, take the podium and conduct their own truth. In 1968, the times were indeed changing, but change, like dissonance in a symphony, often arrives with tension. The domestic sphere, once idealized as harmonious, reveals its own hidden movements of violence, intimate, cyclical, and structural. Domestic violence is not random. It is patterned behavior used to exert control, often exacerbated by economic stress, substance abuse, and histories of trauma. Durkheim's theory of anomy, social normlessness, helps explain how weakened collective norms can lead to interpersonal breakdowns, including violence within families. When the social score loses its rhythm, discord follows. Child welfare systems act as emergency conductors, intervening when neglect or abuse threatens a child's safety. Yet the system itself is complex and uneven. Neglect, often the most common form of maltreatment, is linked to poverty, isolation, and parental stress, but not all poverty equals neglect. Protective services aim to restore harmony, but overburdened agencies and inconsistent policies can leave vulnerable children unheard. Similarly, elder care faces its own crescendos of crisis. Aging populations outpace caregiver availability, and policies struggle to address chronic illness, isolation, and economic insecurity. The tearing of family values through rising divorce rates in the late 20th century and the erosion of formal kinship structures raises a deeper question. Has the pursuit of individual autonomy come at the cost of communal cohesion? Durkheim warned that when institutions like marriage lose their integrative power, society risks fragmentation. Though recent data suggests divorce rates are declining, especially among more educated and affluent groups, the cultural memory of instability lingers. The orchestra of society must balance solo expression with collective resonance. As we move into week 9, we ask, can social policy recompose a more inclusive, cohesive national score?
Group topic: social safety and protection. Subtopics: domestic violence, a pattern of abusive behavior in an intimate relationship used to gain or maintain power and control. Child welfare, services and institutions focused on the physical, social and psychological well-being of children. Aging and elder care, support systems for older adults. Purpose: examine the protection of vulnerable populations. Guiding questions: what factors contribute to domestic violence? How do child welfare systems protect children from neglect and abuse? What are the challenges in elder care and aging policies? Cats in the Cradle, a ballad of broken bonds and social silence. Released in 1974, Harry Chapin's Cats in the Cradle is more than a folk rock hit. It's a haunting meditation on intergenerational neglect, the erosion of family cohesion, and the quiet violence of emotional absence. Inspired by a poem written by Chapin's wife, the song traces a father's repeated failure to connect with his son, only to find the pattern tragically mirrored in adulthood. The refrain, "I'm gonna be like you, Dad," shifts from innocent admiration to devastating indictment, revealing how neglect is not just an act of omission, but a legacy. With themes of domestic violence, not in its physical form, but as emotional abandonment, a subtler, cyclical harm that can fracture identity and trust. While domestic violence often involves overt control and abuse, it also includes patterns of emotional withdrawal, neglect, and unmet needs, especially when compounded by economic stress or social isolation. Chapin's narrative illustrates how such absence, though normalized, can leave lasting scars. From a child welfare perspective, the song underscores the importance of early intervention and relational presence. The son's unmet longing for connection reflects what child welfare systems aim to prevent: the psychological toll of emotional neglect, which can be as damaging as physical harm. The father's repeated deferrals, "We'll get together then," mirror societal tendencies to postpone care, often until it's too late. In the final verse, the roles reverse. The aging father now seeks connection, only to find his son too busy. This moment speaks to the challenges of elder care and aging policy, how older adults, once caregivers, become dependent and often emotionally sidelined. As populations age, policies must address not just physical needs, but social inclusion, mental health, and intergenerational support. Chapin's song becomes a quiet elegy for what's lost when families fail to nurture across time. Ultimately, Cats in the Cradle is a sociological symphony, a cautionary tale about the cost of disconnection. It asks, when we neglect the rhythms of care, do we risk losing the melody of society itself?